r/AskReddit. What's the worst job you've ever had? Hotel housekeeping. If it comes out of the human body, I've cleaned it up. I started in a by-the-hour motel when I was 14, owned by a woman who didn't bother with hazardous waste procedure and cleaned up what looked like a murder scene with nothing but bleach and kitchen gloves. I walked into that room and was absolutely positive that when I pulled the shower curtain open there was going to be a body in the bathtub. Thankfully there wasn't, just blood everywhere. Owner refused to let me report it, made me clean it, and I didn't want to get in shit for bleaching a murder scene at 14, so I never did call the cops. Dancing bear. I was a waiter at a kid's restaurant, which had a bear as its mascot. The new guy had to be the bear on their first day, which meant putting on a massive bear costume over our waiter's uniform, including a huge fur head that you could barely see out of. You were then led around the place to wave at the parents and play with the kids once per hour. If you spoke you were fired, as some of these kids were return customers who would recognize a waiter's voice. Wanting to impress my boss, I really hammed it up. I danced, I gestured, I goofed around, I sat on a mother's lap, I ruffled a father's hair, while he growled "Get off me, or I'll stab you." The boss loved it so much that he made me be the bear every day I worked there, which would be great, except it was August and so hot that the restaurant's aircon broke. The bear suit hadn't been washed in the history of the restaurant, so served as a memorial to the sweat of 100 fallen waiters. Little kids would run headfirst at the bear and headbutt my testicles with depressing regularity, and all it earned me was the disgust of my wait team, who thought I was goofing off work by being the bear, since it was clearly easier than carrying 2 plates of reheated lasagne across the room and refilling drinks. I sprinkled mud onto potatoes that had already been washed, so that they would look freshly dug when they hit the supermarket. Most depressing holiday job I've had. Edit. I woke up to gold. Thank you, kind stranger. I feel like the weeks of mind-numbing boredom were worth it now. I really wish I could provide you all with proof, but it was a few years back, and we weren't allowed to take pics. Not that me by a mud sprinkling rack would have made a particularly thrilling scene. There are some terrible jobs on here, but this is so brilliantly horribly futile. Incomprehensibly pointless. I spent a week working the business end of the nsfw 2000, actual name repressed deep down, which was a grinding horror that separated tiny scraps of chicken meat from splinters of bone. The chicken was delivered in frozen 10kg blocks. Me and 3 or 4 other chosen ones had the task of breaking up the gore block with a chisel and feeding it into the mechanical maw. One day, one of our blocks consisted entirely of wishbones. Thousands of them. I worked at a slaughterhouse for a little while. They killed steers there, but got pork shipped in. The hams came in a gigantic cardboard vat, probably 5 feet wide and 4 deep. They were heavily waxed on the inside to make them waterproof, and had steel banding running around the outside pinned off like an old keg or barrel. Once we fished out most of the hams and trimmed them, there was always a couple feet of blood at the bottom. As the new guy, it was my job to dangle over the edge with a meat hook in one hand fishing for the remaining hams and scraps. Usually it was about an hour in shoulder deep blood with your face next to the surface. I don't think I have any right to complain about my past jobs now. I worked in an office, entry-level job after a career switch. My boss was a crazy woman, never happy, never satisfied, always changing her mind and blaming everyone else. One day she called me in her office and she gave me 2 projects and got mad when I was asked her questions about how she wanted them. At the end of the meeting I asked her which one of these 2 you need first. Both. I thought she misunderstood my question, so I repeated which one of these 2 you need first. Both. No, really, which one of these 2 you need first? At this point she was yelling, both, 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 both. A few months later I had enough of her shit, and I went 2 hours to complain about her treatment of the staff. Of course she had a friend in the HR department, and she got wind of it. She called me in her office and she complained to me about me complaining about her, and she told me, "You don't complain here, you leave." That was my clue. I called my headhunter and found myself a new better job with better pay. A few years later, after I had built my career, and I was actually ahead of her in responsibility and position. I met her at a conference, and she was giving false praise how I was one of the best workers she ever had, and then rhetorically asked me why I left in front of people. I told her that I had to thank her for my career, since she was the one who suggested I left by telling me, "You don't complain here, you leave." She really didn't like that. Lol. Internship at a public relations firm in college. Was promised agency experience, writing opportunities, and valuable experience. Turns out what they actually meant was sitting in a room for 8 hours cold calling CEOs from an outdated call list and trying to trick them into a sales presentation. Might I add, about a month into the job they hired a new intern manager who was the epitome of Massachusetts trash. Drove to work every day from the Cape on his Holly, 2+ hours one way, lauded his degree from Bunker Hill Community College, chain smoked, and jed on the side at trash North Shore nightclubs. He insisted on sitting in the room with us for 8 hours to check if we were actually making calls, all while berating us for being poor employees and cheap labor. On my last day of the internship, he called me into his office and told me the only reason you are still here is because we didn't have to pay you. You'll never be successful like me. You're not cut out for the business world. If I were you, I would drop out and try to find a trade you'll succeed in. Even as a 19-year-old, I knew an idiot when I saw one. I looked him square in the eye and said, "You can go duck yourself," and walked out with the other interns. He then wrote a letter of complaint to my school to try and have my internship credit revoked, but luckily my advisor knew the situation and cut him out. Danda DJ, if you're reading this, I want you to know I took your advice and did my best to never become you. Being poor means being willing to do ducked up things for tiny bits of money, so I've had more sucky jobs than I can count. But the one that stands out to me most is door-to-door political fundraising/canvassing. This was back in the early 90s. The way it worked was you had a clipboard, a pen, a petition, and some envelopes. The whole crew would meet at the office and then pile into the 15-passenger van or vans. The supervisors would drive us out to a territory, turf anywhere from 10 minutes, 2 hours away from the office. Then, they would divide us into pairs and give each pair of canvases a map marked with the pair's assigned turf. We started knocking on doors around 3 o'clock or 4 p.m. and kept at it until 8 o'clock. In that time, we were supposed to knock on people's doors and talk to them about whatever issue we were working on at that point. When I did my brief stint, it was nursing home reform legislation. Then, we were supposed to get the occupant to sign our petition and make a contribution, preferably check or charge, on the spot. Our nightly quota was $120. If you think that people hate having telemarketers call their houses at dinner time to ask them for money, just imagine how much they love it when those same telemarketers show up unannounced on their front doorsteps. Between terrible weather, vicious dogs, crackheads, and tweakers answering the door, people's pervasive hatred of trespassers and solicitors, and constant fear of being fired for missing my quota, field canvassing was definitely one of the worst jobs I've ever had. Working at a music store, rather, instruments. All day there is at least one guy who is playing his first concert for everyone in the store. He has the most expensive guitar hooked up to the loudest amp, while he sausage fingers through the intro to Sweet Child O' Mine. At the counter is a customer upset because the electric guitar he just purchased exploded when he plugged the 1/4-inch jack into the wall socket in his living room. This actually happened. In the drum room there's a group of teenagers doing their best to play a blast beat they heard Pickles talk about in a Metalocalypse rerun. At the counter there is a drummer for a church band that is placing an order for a 18 inches deep snare drum shell. The keyboard area has a mentally challenged kid doing his best Wesley Willis impression by using the play along function of a shitty Casio keyboard. His parents think it's great. The older jazz pianist is dissatisfied with the new electronic keyboards because they don't sound like my Steinway. At the counter is an aspiring producer trying to convince the salesman to teach him to use the software since he can't refund it now that it's registered to his iLock key. In the DJ room there's one kid who thinks he's Deadmau 5 by literally just playing a Deadmau 5 CD. There's another kid who's asking for a record needle and demo vinyl so he can try scratching. Record needles are about $60 to $120 each, so no, none of them have any idea what a DJ mixer is. In the pro audio area there's an old guy who did some roadie work in the 80s, and he's arguing with a salesman over the price being higher than what it was 35 years ago. There's another customer looking to buy sound reinforcement for his church, but he's haggling over getting a better price for Jesus despite the fact that he already won't be paying tax on the items. At the counter is a man angry that the microphone he bought doesn't work without a cable or a speaker to plug it into. This actually happened. Then there's the people buying sheet music and hardware for their orchestral instruments. They are generally pretty chill, if a little weird. Usually they just want reads. Thank you for watching Reddit. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more r/AskReddit videos. Share your stories in the comments section below.